Camille Claude is a French sculptor who was born in 1864 and passed away at 78 years old in 1943. During her childhood, Claude would develop an interest in sculptures from her father's library, and her father would support her passion for sculpting, unlike her mother, who was more skeptical and doubtful towards her daughter's interest. Despite this, Claude would continue with her studies and would eventually start to work with well-known sculptor Alfred Boucher at Accademia Colarossi. In 1883, a sculptor by the name of Auguste Rodin took interest in Claude and recognized her natural talent and made her his assistant. Through being Rodin's assistant, Claude would help Rodin with his sculptures and would work with nude models. At the time, this was out of the ordinary for a female artist, but regardless of this, Claude would develop her skills in sculptures while working alongside Rodin, and her sculptures would become more well-known by the public and would be criticized from time to time. This was because of her sculptures being described as overly sensual, vigorous, and forceful. Claude would develop a romantic relationship with Rodin, and unfortunately their relationship would end on a negative note, with Rodin refusing to leave his mistress Rose Barrett, along with Claude having an abortion and ending their relationship in 1892. Claude was left feeling alienated and mistreated on top of being in a state of isolation due to her father being deceased and her mother abandoning her because of Claude's passion and career in sculpting. Furthermore, Claude would also face troubles of sexual discrimination, which prevented her from making a living in the same manner as a man, and with the death of her father, she was entirely alone. It was unfortunate for Claude to face such discrimination, and I personally never want anyone to experience any form of discrimination in their lives. But unfortunately, some people experience these sort of struggles, and in the case of Claude, she created a beautiful sculpture full of emotion because of it. Claude's sculpture, Torso of a Crouching Woman, which was modeled sometime in 1884 to 85 and was cast in 1913. This sculpture depicts a crouched down naked woman with no head and no arms, along with a large portion of her left leg cut off. The only remaining pieces of her left leg are the foot and part of the ankle bone, along with the upper half of the leg where the femur bone would be. The sculpture as a whole can be described as a fragmented woman, which you could correlate with the various emotions and obstacles Claude faced after her relationship with Rodin. The anatomy of the sculpture is also incredibly detailed, with various parts of the human anatomy, such as bones, muscles, and tendons being clearly visible and accurately depicted. Apart from the incredible structure of the sculpture, the emotions that emanate from it are powerful. The Getty Museum describes the sculpture as harmoniously modeled. The back presents a splendid study of anatomy, with a masterful rendition of bones and muscles underneath the skin. From the contoured pose of the body and its fragmentary nature emanate expressions of pain, solitude, and fear. The overall sculpt of this piece drew my attention, and the more I looked at it, the more I felt attached to it. The first thought that came into my mind when I saw the sculpture was that it reminded me of that feeling of hopelessness when you're going through a rough time in life, where your entire body has that strange, indescribable feeling where you feel a sort of pressure that you express when you feel like you've hit rock bottom. Dread might not be the correct word to describe it, but I know this feeling well, despite the fact that I can't accurately explain it. But regardless, the sculpture reminded me of that feeling. Since that feeling makes me want to lie down in the fetal position, I imagine that the emotions Claude felt after her relationship with Rodin, along with the feelings of isolation, are what left an impact on Claude's mind state, and this would lead to the creation of the sculpture. I also thought about why the sculpture depicted a naked woman rather than a partially or fully clothed woman. Part of the reason I had to do with working with nude models while Claudel was Rodin's assistant and having grown used to this type of art. But I felt that the reason why Claudel chose to make the woman nude was because of the emotions that are expressed in the sculpture itself. The feelings of isolation, fear, and pain are more than human emotions, They are natural emotions that every living creature experiences, hence the reason for the nudity in the sculpture. We as humans aren't born with clothes. Clothes are a part of the cultures we developed as a species. And so by depicting a naked woman, the sculpture expresses natural emotions in our natural state of being. Looking at another sculpture by Claudel, The Implorer, which was modeled in 1898 and cast in 1905, it depicts a nude woman on her knees, leaning forward with her arms raised and positioned in a manner as if she was holding on to something or someone. The sculpture was the embodiment of Claudel's relationship with Rodin and the tensions of sex, love, and creative passion that she had with Rodin. Clearly, there was some form of negativity that influenced Claudel's art at this point in her life. Sadly, in the latter half of Claudel's life, she didn't get to experience a happier or positive life, since, as the Library of Congress puts it, she was forcibly committed to an insane asylum where she spent the remaining many years of her tragic life. I wish that Claudel was never put in an insane asylum, especially since it was forced upon her. It's terrible and tragic that her life kept spiraling downwards at a certain point and to be left in an insane asylum. I can only imagine the thoughts roaming throughout her mind while she was there. The possible sculptures that she could never make and the opportunities to live a better life were taken away from her, and her last sculptures depicted such emotional negativity that many of us in society from the past, present, and future could relate to. Sam Francis is an American painter born in 1923 and passed away in 1994. He was recognized as one of the leading interpreters of light and color. Francis would incorporate different styles of art into his own, with references to New York abstract expressionism, East Asian art such as Chinese and Japanese art, and French impressionism. All of these combined with his roots from the Bay Area make up Francis's style of art, which embodies his passion for literature, music, science, and of course, his emotions and personal conflicts. One of his paintings, titled I Am an Arbor for Her Thoughts, which was painted in 1973, is an oil painting, which is part of the Sam Francis in Japan Emptiness Overflowing exhibit at LACMA. The painting has splashes of oil paint in somewhat straight lines, which start and end from different segments of the canvas. The colors present on the canvas are red, green, blue, yellow, purple, and black. The presence of some of these colors are from the mixing of two colors on certain portions of the canvas. The strokes of black paint are hidden underneath the drops of other colors, but yet you can still clearly see the presence of the black strokes. As for the drops of paint, there are some sections of the painting where there appears to be an absence of color, which is uniquely different than just simply not painting in one area, but rather it appears as if something was preventing the paint from spreading and covering certain areas of the canvas. However, there were some smaller spots of paint in such areas which somewhat mask these little voids of emptiness. The main focus of the painting is the empty space in the center of the canvas, which resembles that of a right triangle rotated to the right at 30 degrees. What's interesting about this piece is that this piece and the exhibit itself focuses on the Japanese aesthetic of Ma, which according to Hollis Goodall is an aesthetic principle which refers to a void or interval that is in balance with mass, color, and defined form. Often, Ma appears as a negative space as opposed to the positive forms depicted in the same work. The voids of emptiness present throughout the painting are the aesthetic of Ma. Another painting from Francis titled Towards Disappearance, which was painted sometime in 1957 to 58, has a similar style to that of I Am an Arbor for Her Thoughts, despite being over a decade older. The main colors in this painting are red, blue, and some bits of green. Most of the painting is blank with no paint splatters present, but on the parts where there is paint, although they don't cover much of the canvas, Its presence is difficult to ignore. If you attempt to look at the bottom left of the canvas where there is blank space, your peripheral vision will still clearly take in the presence of the colors that are present. My interpretation of Tor's disappearance is that the colors present on the canvas are shrinking into nothingness, hence why there are some blots of paint where there is some color bleed that represents the reminiscence of its previous size. I also was reminded of cells within our bodies, with the darker spots being the nucleus and the outer bleed of the paint being the entirety of the cell. With how some of the blots of the paint are on the canvas, they remind me of the death of a cell and how a cell slowly sort of disintegrates and falls apart in its last moments of life. These artworks by Francis are important additions to modern art as they carry the legacy of an older Japanese aesthetic, all while reviving its presence in the world of art. At first glance, they may seem simplistic, but the underlying meaning behind the art is what makes these pieces truly special.